The Valkyria were an enigma, even to the galaxy's most formidable civilizations. These warrior women, bred for battle and honed through centuries of unrelenting warfare, had built a reputation that preceded them to every corner of the stars. Clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal, they moved with an eerie grace, their every step calculated, their every motion lethal. Their ships, sleek and menacing, bristled with weaponry that could reduce entire planets to ashes, a testament to their supremacy in warfare. The Valkyria's society was one of discipline and honor, where strength was revered above all, and only the fiercest survived to command. As they approached Earth, their leader, Commander Seraphina, regarded the blue planet with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. This world, on the fringes of the galaxy, was an anomaly. Primitive, backward, and insignificant in the grand scheme of things, or so it seemed. The Valkyria expected little resistance from a species that had barely ventured beyond their own moon. Conquest was a mere formality, a task to be completed before moving on to more worthy challenges. The descent was swift and precise, their ships cutting through the atmosphere with the precision of a scalpel. As they touched down on Earth's surface, the Valkyria prepared for what they believed would be a swift and effortless victory. Yet, as they spread out to subjugate the planet, they were met not with fear, but with defiance. Panic did indeed grip Earth's population as the alien ships darkened the skies. Yet, it was not the paralyzing fear the Valkyria had expected. Instead, humanity's response was one of organized chaos, a flurry of activity as militaries across the globe mobilized with a speed and efficiency that took the Valkyria by surprise. The first encounters were brutal, with the Valkyria cutting through human defenses with the ease of a blade slicing through cloth. But then, something unexpected happened. The Valkyria warriors, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower and unmatched combat skills, found themselves facing a foe that refused to crumble. Earth's military forces, though technologically inferior, fought back with a tenacity and ingenuity that the Valkyria had not anticipated. Guerrilla tactics, unorthodox strategies, and a sheer unwillingness to surrender began to turn the tide, if only slightly. The first skirmish was a rude awakening for the Valkyria. In a dense forest on the outskirts of a city, a squad of Valkyria warriors encountered a human military unit. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, should have been easily dispatched. Yet, as the battle unfolded, the Valkyria found themselves entangled in a fight far more challenging than they had anticipated. The humans used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes that disrupted the Valkyria's formations. Explosions tore through the trees, smoke and fire filling the air as the humans pressed their attack. Commander Seraphina, observing the battle from a distance, frowned as she watched her warriors struggle against these so-called primitives. How could it be that such a weak species was holding its own against the might of the Valkyria? It was not fear she felt, but a growing respect, tinged with frustration. These humans were not what they seemed. Amid the chaos, one human stood out. A man, seemingly ordinary, yet with a presence that commanded attention. He moved with a calm precision, directing his soldiers with a confidence that belied the dire circumstances. His strategies were bold, unpredictable, and effective. Under his command, the humans fought not just to survive, but to win. Seraphina's eyes narrowed as she focused on the man. He was different from the others, a leader in every sense of the word. His bravery was undeniable, his mind sharp, his will unbreakable. The Valkyria had faced many foes, but this man was something new. He represented a threat that could not be easily quantified, a variable in their calculations that they had not accounted for. As the battle raged on, it became clear that this was not going to be the easy conquest the Valkyria had envisioned. The humans were resilient, their spirit unyielding even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Valkyria were forced to retreat, regrouping as they reassessed their strategy. For the first time in a long while, the Valkyria faced uncertainty. This planet, this Earth, held secrets they had not anticipated. The man who led the resistance was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of human defiance, a rallying point for those who refused to bow to the might of the Valkyria. As the sun set on the battlefield, casting long shadows over the scarred earth, Commander Seraphina knew that this was only the beginning. The Valkyria would return, stronger and more prepared, but they would no longer underestimate humanity. They would no longer dismiss these humans as mere primitives. In that moment, as she watched the human forces regroup under the leadership of the man who had so effectively thwarted their advance, Seraphina felt something she had not experienced in years: anticipation. This was no longer just a conquest, it was a challenge, a test of the Valkyria's supremacy. And deep down, in a place she would never admit, she felt a flicker of doubt. The Valkyria had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had found a worthy adversary. And as they prepared for the next encounter, they knew that the battle for Earth had only just begun. The Valkyria, stung by their initial failure to dominate Earth's defenders, resolved to escalate the conflict. This time, they would not hold back. They unleashed the full might of their arsenal: plasma cannons that could vaporize entire city blocks, energy shields impervious to conventional weapons, and aerial drones equipped with advanced AI for precision strikes. The skies above Earth darkened as their warships hovered ominously, preparing for an all-out assault. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread hanging over the planet as humanity braced for the onslaught. When the battle began, it was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. The sheer scale of the Valkyria's attack was overwhelming. Their forces moved with military precision, cutting through Earth's defenses with calculated efficiency. Buildings crumbled under the relentless barrage, and the ground shook with the force of their weapons. The chaos was unimaginable. Explosions lit up the sky, and the sound of warfare echoed across cities and countryside alike. For a moment, it seemed as though the Valkyria would finally succeed in crushing humanity under their heel. But Earth's defenders, though battered, were not defeated. Led by the male protagonist, they had anticipated this escalation and prepared accordingly. He had studied the Valkyria's tactics, learning from each encounter, and devised countermeasures that played to humanity's strengths: ingenuity, adaptability, and an unyielding spirit. Where the Valkyria relied on brute force and advanced technology, the humans used guerrilla tactics, striking swiftly and retreating before the Valkyria could fully respond. The protagonist's strategies were unconventional, bordering on reckless, yet they worked. He utilized the terrain to his advantage, turning urban landscapes into traps and ambush points. His forces disrupted the Valkyria's communications, sowing confusion among their ranks, and targeted their supply lines, forcing them to overextend. Every time the Valkyria adapted, the protagonist was already 2 steps ahead, anticipating their moves and countering them with tactics they had never encountered before. The Valkyria, who had initially dismissed Earth's defenders as insignificant, began to feel a grudging respect for their resilience. They had never faced a foe who could adapt so quickly, who fought with such determination despite the odds. The Valkyria warriors, known for their discipline and loyalty to their commander, started to question their assumptions. The male protagonist was becoming a figure of fascination, a warrior whose mind was as formidable as any weapon. Commander Seraphina, the Valkyria leader, found herself increasingly conflicted. She had always believed in the superiority of her people, in their right to conquer and rule. Yet, the more she observed Earth's defenders, particularly the male protagonist, the more she began to doubt. His strategies were not just effective, they were brilliant. He fought not just with strength, but with a deep understanding of warfare, of how to turn weakness into strength, and use every resource at his disposal. Seraphina's admiration for the protagonist was unsettling. He was an enemy, a human, yet she could not deny the respect she felt for him. Her warriors were beginning to feel the same. They saw in him a reflection of the values they held dear: courage, honor, and an unbreakable will. The lines between enemy and ally began to blur, and Seraphina struggled to reconcile her duty with these new, unwelcome feelings. The conflict reached a critical turning point during a pivotal battle in the ruins of a once great city. The Valkyria had planned a decisive strike, intending to end the resistance once and for all. They deployed their most advanced technology, overwhelming Earth's forces with sheer firepower. It seemed as though victory was within their grasp. But the protagonist had anticipated this. He had lured the Valkyria into a trap, using the city's labyrinthine streets and underground tunnels to his advantage. As the Valkyria advanced, they found themselves ensnared in a web of carefully laid explosives and ambushes. The protagonist's forces struck with surgical precision, dismantling the Valkyria's assault force piece by piece. The battle was fierce, the stakes higher than ever, but in the end, the humans emerged victorious. The Valkyria were forced to retreat, their forces decimated and their morale shaken. This was more than just a defeat, it was a humiliation. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Seraphina, retreating with her warriors, knew that this was not the end. The Valkyria would return, but they would do so with a newfound respect for their enemy. The male protagonist had shown them that Earth was not to be taken lightly, and that victory would require more than just superior technology and firepower. As the Valkyria regrouped, the humans did the same, preparing for the next inevitable clash. But now, the balance had shifted. The Valkyria had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they had found a worthy adversary. The male protagonist had outsmarted them, and in doing so, had changed the course of the conflict. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had hope. And as both sides prepared for the battles to come, the respect between them grew, laying the groundwork for what would be a fierce and complicated rivalry. The Valkyria were a society unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Their culture was deeply rooted in a matriarchal hierarchy, where strength, honor, and combat prowess were the ultimate measures of worth. In their eyes, Earth was a world of contradictions, home to a species that, despite its apparent weaknesses, had managed to repel the galaxy's fiercest warriors. The Valkyria, conditioned to see men as secondary to women in leadership and combat roles, were both intrigued and bewildered by the role Earth's men played in the defense of their planet. This fascination centered on the male protagonist, whose strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve had turned him into a figure of unexpected importance. For the Valkyria, the idea of a man leading a military force with such effectiveness was almost inconceivable. In their society, men were not warriors, they were caretakers, artisans, and scholars. Women fought the wars, led the armies, and made the decisions. Yet, here was a man who defied those expectations, who commanded respect through his actions and intelligence. The Valkyria warriors, who had once scoffed at the notion of a male strategist, now found themselves re-evaluating their perceptions. The protagonist's strategies were unconventional, often catching the Valkyria off guard, and his willingness to stand on the front lines earned him their reluctant admiration. As the conflict continued, the cultural chasm between the Valkyria and humans became increasingly evident. The Valkyria's interactions with the protagonist were laced with curiosity and confusion. Conversations between captured Valkyria warriors and Earth's defenders often highlighted the stark differences in their societal norms. The Valkyria were direct, blunt, and unyielding, while the humans were more flexible, willing to adapt and innovate. The protagonist, in particular, was a puzzle they could not easily solve. His leadership style, which combined empathy with ruthlessness, was something the Valkyria had never encountered before. The protagonist recognized the Valkyria's rigid societal structure as both a strength and a vulnerability. Their adherence to tradition made them predictable, and he began to formulate a plan to exploit this. He understood that the Valkyria's underestimation of Earth's men was their Achilles' heel. By leveraging this, he could turn the tide of the war. His plan was daring. He would use the Valkyria's own expectations against them, orchestrating a series of feints and deceptions that would leave them vulnerable to a decisive strike. The tension grew as he set his plan in motion, aware that failure could mean the end for Earth's defenders. But as the battles raged on, something unexpected happened. The growing mutual respect between the protagonist and Commander Seraphina, the Valkyria leader, began to shift the dynamic of the war. Seraphina, who had once viewed the protagonist as little more than an anomaly, now saw him as a true equal. During a particularly brutal skirmish, she found herself in a position to either let him fall or intervene. Against her better judgment, she chose to save him, pulling him from the jaws of death at the last moment. This act of mercy complicated their relationship, introducing a level of personal connection that neither had anticipated. The moment was brief, but it lingered in the minds of both leaders. Serafina's decision to save the protagonist was not born out of strategy, but something deeper, an acknowledgement of the respect she had come to hold for him. For the protagonist, this moment was equally unsettling. He had expected nothing but enmity from the Valkyria, yet here was their leader, risking her life to save his. It was a gesture that hinted at the possibility of something beyond mere conflict, a potential for understanding, even alliance. As the war dragged on, the protagonist made a discovery that could change everything. In the wreckage of a downed Valkyria ship, he uncovered a piece of technology unlike anything Earth had seen before. It was a device, small and unassuming, but with the potential to either save or doom the planet. The device was a key component of the Valkyria's advanced weaponry, and in the right hands, it could be reverse-engineered to give Earth a fighting chance. But there was a catch. Using it would mean crossing a line, exploiting a vulnerability that could cripple the Valkyria in ways that went beyond the battlefield. The discovery presented the protagonist with a moral dilemma. On one hand, the device represented a chance to turn the tide of the war decisively in Earth's favor. On the other hand, it could lead to a level of destruction that even he was hesitant to unleash. The Valkyria were formidable enemies, but they were also honorable, bound by a code that the protagonist had come to respect. The thought of using this newfound power weighed heavily on him, as he considered the potential consequences, not just for the Valkyria, but for humanity as well. The section ends with the protagonist standing at a crossroads, the device in hand, torn between his duty to protect Earth and his growing respect for his enemy. The war had already changed him, forcing him to question his own beliefs and the lengths he was willing to go to achieve victory. The choice he faced was not just about winning the war, but about the kind of future he wanted to help create, a future that might still hold room for honor, even in the midst of conflict. As the battle lines were drawn once again, the protagonist knew that his next move could determine the fate of two worlds. The air was thick with anticipation as both sides prepared for what was believed to be the final, decisive battle. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that weighed heavily on everyone involved. On Earth, the military forces, battered and weary, steeled themselves for the coming onslaught. The male protagonist, now a seasoned leader, bore the weight of the world on his shoulders. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, determination, and an ever-growing sense of responsibility. He had come to understand the gravity of the situation. This battle would not just decide the fate of Earth, but perhaps the fate of the Valkyria as well. He couldn't afford to fail. Commander Serafina, too, found herself in uncharted territory. Her once unwavering confidence had been shaken, not by the strength of her enemies, but by the internal conflict that now gnawed at her. She had always believed in the Valkyria's superiority, in their right to conquer and lead. Yet the encounters with Earth's defenders, especially with the male protagonist, had stirred something within her. A doubt, a question: what if the Valkyria were not the invincible force she had always believed? What if there was more to leadership than mere strength? As she prepared her warriors for the final battle, these thoughts haunted her, challenging everything she had ever known. As the forces on both sides made their final preparations, an unexpected development forced the Valkyria leader and the male protagonist into an uneasy alliance. A rogue faction within the Valkyria, disillusioned with Serafina's leadership, had splintered off and joined forces with a new threat, a rival alien race that sought to exploit the conflict between Earth and the Valkyria for their own gain. This new enemy was ruthless and efficient, and their arrival on the battlefield posed a danger to both Earth and the Valkyria. With no other choice, Serafina and the protagonist realized that they had to work together if they were to survive the impending battle. The alliance was one born of necessity, not trust. Both leaders understood that they needed each other, but neither fully trusted the other. The protagonist, wary of Serafina's true intentions, kept his plans close to his chest, revealing only what was necessary. Serafina, on the other hand, struggled with the idea of relying on a man, especially one from a species she had once considered inferior. Yet, as they strategized and planned, a reluctant respect began to grow between them. They shared a common goal: to protect their people from annihilation, and this goal, more than anything, began to bridge the gap between them. When the battle finally erupted, it was like nothing either side had ever experienced. The combined forces of Earth and the Valkyria clashed with the rogue faction and their new allies in a cataclysmic confrontation. The battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos, where the lines between friend and foe blurred in the heat of combat. Explosions ripped through the sky, and the ground shook with the force of the conflict. Amidst the chaos, moments of heroism shone through, human soldiers fighting side by side with Valkyria warriors, united by a common cause. The protagonist and Seraphina fought together, their uneasy alliance tested by the relentless assault of their enemies. They moved with a synchronized precision that surprised even themselves, each anticipating the other's moves as if they had been fighting together for years. The protagonist's strategic mind and Seraphina's combat prowess complemented each other perfectly, turning the tide of the battle at crucial moments. There were moments of near defeat, where all seemed lost, but each time, they found a way to push forward, to keep fighting. As the battle reached its peak, the situation grew dire. The rogue faction, desperate to secure victory, unleashed a devastating weapon, a massive energy cannon capable of obliterating everything in its path. The combined forces of Earth and the Valkyria were pushed to the brink, their defenses crumbling under the relentless barrage. It seemed as though defeat was inevitable, and both the protagonist and Seraphina knew that their time was running out. But in that moment of despair, the protagonist devised a daring plan. He proposed a risky maneuver that involved using the Valkyria's advanced technology in a way that Seraphina had never considered. It was a gamble, one that could either save them all or lead to their total destruction. Seraphina hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But as she looked into the eyes of the protagonist, she saw something that gave her the courage to take the risk: trust. It was a fragile trust, born out of their shared struggle, but it was enough. With no time to lose, they executed the plan. The combined forces rallied for one final push, using the protagonist's strategy and Seraphina's warriors to strike at the heart of the enemy's forces. The energy cannon was their primary target, and as they closed in, the intensity of the battle reached a fever pitch. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing assault, with lives hanging in the balance. Just when it seemed that they might fall short, the plan worked. The energy cannon was destroyed in a spectacular explosion, and the rogue faction's forces, now leaderless and disorganized, began to crumble. The tide of battle turned in favor of the alliance, and with a final, coordinated effort, they routed their enemies, securing a hard-fought victory. In the aftermath of the battle, the protagonist and Seraphina stood together, surveying the devastation around them. The battlefield was quiet now, the echoes of conflict fading into silence. They had won, but the cost had been high. Both leaders were forever changed by what they had endured, by the choices they had made, and by the unlikely alliance that had saved their worlds. As they parted ways, there was a mutual understanding between them, an acknowledgement that, despite everything, they had found common ground in the midst of war. The battlefield was silent in the aftermath of the conflict, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged just hours before. The air, still thick with the smell of smoke and scorched earth, bore witness to the tremendous toll the battle had taken on both Earth and the Valkyria. The ground was littered with debris, the remains of machines and the fallen, a somber reminder of the price paid for victory. The human forces, though battered and weary, stood tall, having withstood the might of both the Valkyria and the rogue faction. Yet, the cost was evident in the hollow eyes and weary expressions of the survivors. The Valkyria, too, had been changed by the conflict. Their once unshakable confidence had been tempered by the harsh reality of a war that had pushed them to their limits. Their departure from Earth was a somber affair, marked by a sense of finality. They left behind a world that bore the scars of their presence, a planet that had been forever altered by their arrival and the battles that followed. Yet they also left behind something intangible, a respect for humanity that had not existed before. As their ships ascended into the sky, leaving Earth's atmosphere, the Valkyria carried with them a newfound understanding of the strength and resilience of the human race. Amid the wreckage, a new bond had formed between the two cultures, one that was symbolized by the unlikely partnership between the male protagonist and Commander Seraphina. What had begun as a conflict of wills had evolved into a relationship built on mutual respect. Their final interaction, as Seraphina prepared to leave Earth, was charged with an unspoken acknowledgement of what they had achieved together. They stood facing one another, the weight of everything that had transpired between them heavy in the air. Seraphina, usually so stoic and unreadable, allowed a small smile to touch her lips. "You've shown us much, human. Perhaps there is more to your kind than we first believed." The protagonist, his usual guarded demeanor softened by the trials they had endured together, nodded. "And perhaps we have more to learn from each other than either of us thought." There was no need for more words. The understanding between them was clear. As they parted, the possibility of future alliances, or at least continued contact between their peoples, lingered in the air. The Valkyrie were leaving, but they were not abandoning Earth. They were simply acknowledging that this chapter had ended, and a new one was about to begin. In the quiet that followed, the protagonist found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The battles, the decisions, the sacrifices, it all weighed heavily on him. He had grown in ways he hadn't anticipated, shaped by the crucible of war and the unlikely friendships that had formed in its midst. He had started as a leader, but now he was something more, someone who had come to understand the complexities of war and the nuances of those who fought it. His encounters with the Valkyria had challenged his perceptions, forcing him to see beyond the immediate conflict and into the deeper connections that could be forged even between enemies. He thought of the men and women who had fought beside him, of the lives lost and the futures forever changed. The world had been tested in ways it never expected, but it had emerged stronger, more united. The trials they had faced had forged a new sense of purpose among Earth's people, a determination to protect their home and to stand as equals on the galactic stage. The protagonist knew that Earth had been strengthened not just by its victories, but by the lessons learned in both defeat and alliance. As he stood overlooking the landscape, now quiet and still, the protagonist understood that this was not the end, but rather a beginning. The battle had been won, but the future was uncertain, filled with new challenges and opportunities. The events that had transpired had shown him that unity, understanding, and respect were the true sources of strength. It was a lesson that he would carry with him as he continued to lead, one that would guide the world into the future. The story that had begun with a clash of cultures and a battle for survival had ended with a powerful message about the possibilities that lie in diversity. The protagonist had learned that even the most unexpected alliances could bring about the greatest victories. And as Earth looked to the stars, knowing that it was no longer alone, there was a sense of hope, a belief that whatever challenges lay ahead, they could be met with courage, wisdom, and the strength that comes from unity. The final moments of reflection gave way to a quiet resolve. The protagonist knew that there would be future adventures, future battles to fight, and future alliances to forge. But for now, there was peace, a hard-won peace that had cost much but had also given much in return. And as he turned away from the battlefield, ready to face whatever came next, he carried with him the knowledge that they had not just survived, but had grown stronger together. The journey was far from over, but they were ready for whatever lay ahead.